Criminology is a true crime podcast that may contain discussion about violent or disturbing topics. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 354 of the Criminology podcast. This is Mike Ferguson.
And this is Mike Morford.
Mr. Morford, how you doing this week, man?
I'm doing pretty good. How you doing?
I'm doing, pretty well. I overslept this morning. I missed our initial meeting time, but, I've got my coffee. I'm ready to go.
Well, you should be rested up, so this should go smoothly.
Yeah, I got a little bit of extra sleep. Sometimes you need it. Let's go ahead and do our Patreon shout outs. We had Amanda Levette, Carla Tate, and Brittany Gurley. So some great new support. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, that's some awesome support. Thank you very much. And for anyone else that would like to help support the show, head over to patreon.com/criminology to get started.
So you know what, Morph? This year already is flying by. And that means we're less than 6 months away from CrimeCon.
Yeah, CrimeCon's your chance to meet and hang out with all your favorite true crime friends and celebs and say hi to us on Podcast Row. It's happening September 5th through the 7th at the Gaylord Rockies Resort and Convention Center in Aurora, Colorado.
And Morph and I will be on Podcast Row, and of course we'll have a joint Criminology TCAT meetup like we do every year. We hope to see you there, and if you're going, why not save money on those passes? Use our promo code Criminology to save 10% on your standard badges during checkout at crimecon.com. All right, so now that we have all that out of the way, let's jump into this week's case. With Easter coming up, it's a reminder for those who celebrate that holiday to really cherish your loved ones. And a lot of the time, the holiday brings family get-togethers. Families celebrate the holiday in a variety of different ways. Maybe it's an Easter egg hunt in the morning or Easter Mass. For a lot of people, it's a special dinner with their loved ones. While Easter is generally a day of peace with your loved ones, that's not always the case. 50 years ago on March 30th, 1975, Easter Sunday was a nightmare for one family.
That Sunday, James Ruppert called the police, simply telling the dispatcher, "There's been a shooting." When officers arrived at the Ruppert home on Minor Avenue in Hamilton, Ohio, James was at the front door waiting for them. His outfit, his Sunday best with a white tie, was covered in blood. Officers went inside the home surveying the crime scene. This was not just a shooting. The first floor of the home was a bloodbath with 11 victims in various rooms. Hamilton Police Chief George McNally was quoted in a March 1975 AP story as saying it was a bloody mess. One officer who had been on the force for 25 years had trouble sleeping for a week after responding to the crime scene. There were so many victims so close together that investigators had a difficult time moving through the crime scene without stepping on any of them. It was a shocking scene, something they had never expected to be called to, let alone on Easter Sunday.
From the very beginning, there was never any question of who killed the 11 people inside the home, but everyone was left to wonder why. James Ruppert was taken into custody, leaving everyone to ask, why would someone kill their entire family on what is supposed to be an enjoyable holiday? Even when you look back now at the sequence of events that morning, there is no obvious trigger. There's nothing that explains why he chose that moment or what exactly became the point of no return. But despite the lack of answers, what we know for sure is that James Ruppert unleashed a horrific attack on his family.
That Easter Sunday, the Ruppert family gathered at the home of 65-year-old Charity Ruppert, who allowed her son James to live there as an adult. James's older brother, Leonard, brought his wife Alma and their 8 children. James had been out at a bar until closing, 2:30 that morning, so he was asleep upstairs when they all arrived. It was a typical Easter. There were Easter baskets and an egg hunt for the children in the front yard. It seems like a lot of families have an early dinner on Easter, and the Rupperts were no exception. At around 5 p.m., Charity, Leonard, and Alma were in the kitchen, starting to get things ready for Sloppy Joe's, while some of the kids hovered underfoot, and the rest were in the living room. It was also around this time that James woke up. Most accounts of this case state that he immediately loaded 4 of his guns, a .22 caliber rifle, a .357 Magnum, and 2 .22 caliber handguns, and then headed down the stairs to commit the massacre.
However, other reports note that James was originally heading to the shooting range and wasn't going to spend time with the family on that holiday, but he also wasn't planning to kill them all either. But Leonard greeted him in the kitchen. According to the New York Times, Leonard said, "How's that Volkswagen?" Apparently, that was a fatal mistake. James did not consider this a friendly, innocent question or even one asked out of genuine concern. To him, Leonard was clearly making fun of his older car, which sometimes had issues. In James's mind, Leonard's car would never break down because he could afford the best, and he made sure to maintain his vehicles. The perceived teasing was nothing new, but it was the final straw for James. James had always been in Leonard's shadow. Born first, Leonard was named after their father, not James. With Leonard as the perfect son, their mother had no need for another, and frequently told James that she wished he had been a girl. No matter what he did, he could never measure up to Leonard because he couldn't be the firstborn son, and he wasn't born a girl. He felt like an outsider. So Morf, we know the end result. There's going to be a massacre. We know that. We're going to get into all the details, but it's the, impetus for this massacre that is really intriguing. You have this, what seems to be a long-standing, I don't even want to call it a rivalry between brothers. It seems as though James felt inferior to his brother, and he also felt as though his parents didn't want him.
It seems like there was definitely some friction there, not always getting along, and I get it. Siblings don't always get along. Sometimes they tease each other, but this seems like it was really something deep, and at least as James perceived it, it was very hurtful and a thorn in his side all these years.
So I think that's going to be an important thing, right? As we continue through the story, what exactly was the family dynamic? And how did James perceive, the other members of the family? How did he feel as though he was treated? I mean, I think all of that's going to be important.
When James was 12 years old, their father, Leonard Sr., passed away from tuberculosis. Their childhood came to an abrupt end, but 14-year-old Leonard Jr. became the man of the house. It was obviously a tough time for the entire Ruppert family. James felt taunted and picked on growing up. When he was 16, he briefly ran away from home and attempted to take his own life by hanging himself with a sheet. For whatever reason, the attempt was not successful, and he went back home. After 2 years of college, James dropped out. He did some work as a draftsman, which is a type of engineering technician that specializes in drawing very detailed designs and schematics. But he had trouble finding steady work and had been laid off from his most recent job, where he only received on-call work as needed. Leonard effortlessly earned his electrical engineering degree in college and quickly went on to land a very good job. On top of it all, James felt that Leonard was the handsome one too, and that he himself wasn't.
So now we have even more information to work with, right? James felt unwanted, unloved, but it really seemed as though he was constantly comparing himself to Leonard. Leonard was better looking. Leonard had a better job, was more successful. And now, one day after James's 41st birthday, the feelings that he had had in his 20s were all still there. Leonard had a great job as an electrical engineer at General Electric, While Charity was upset with having to give money to James, Leonard helped support his single mother. Even though he had a large family to support, Leonard was proud to have given his mother lots of grandchildren to dote on. He owned a home in Fairfield, and James lived with their mother rent-free. James was unemployed and had been for months. In October of 1974, he had been fired from his on-call job with production design services in Dayton, Ohio. And Morf, this is a story that's, very close to me. I live in a suburb of Dayton, Ohio. Hamilton is not that far to the south of me.
Have you ever heard of this case before we did it?
Yeah, I had heard of it. Obviously, it's a very large massacre. Now, it was a long time ago. I was a toddler when this all happened, but these are the types of cases that kind of are still talked about as time goes on because of the magnitude of the crime.
And it's always a little bit interesting when it's a case that's close to you or you have some knowledge of it or it happened in your town. It just makes the case hit home a little bit more.
Yeah, it does. There's no doubt about that. And we hear that from listeners all the time.
James had never married and had no children. There wasn't just resentment brewing up because James stayed single his whole life. He probably felt that Leonard was living the life he was supposed to have. Leonard's wife, Alma Ruppert, started off as friends with both James and Leonard Jr. In fact, she met them both at the same dance. In 1981, Alma's mother, Edna, told the Cincinnati Post that they were both nice boys and Alma enjoyed them. She said they'd bring her home before midnight. Some reports state that Alma and James briefly dated before she ended up with Leonard, and also that Alma was the only girlfriend James ever had. According to Edna, choosing between them wasn't a hard decision because she had fallen in love with Leonard. In his mind, James should have been with Alma. He should have had the big, beautiful family. He should have been the one with the great job in the engineering field. He should have had a reliable car that no one could laugh at. It was James that deserved to be successful, independent, and ultimately happy.
So more insight, right, into the family dynamic, but especially the dynamic between these two brothers. There was a lot of jealousy on the part of James, and that extended to Leonard's wife, who James knew way back when, maybe even dated, and felt as though she should have been his wife. I mean, basically, Morf, he felt as though Leonard was living the life he was supposed to have.
And if he still had feelings for Alma and all these years and had to see them having, child after child, knowing that could have been his family, it was probably just all weighing on him and, bringing him to this point where he couldn't take anymore.
Well, one thing's for certain. I mean, I am getting the picture that he's incredibly jealous of his brother. And my assumption is that the more things that went wrong in his life, the more that he would look at his brother's seemingly perfect life and be upset about it.
It seems like instead of trying to better himself, better his situation, get a better job, get a better car, go out and meet somebody, have his own family, he just spent his time wallowing in unhappy he was and how jealous he was of Leonard.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there. Let's face it, there are some people who, look at the negative more so than the positive. And, James seems to have been, one of those individuals. There are also people who want to blame, everyone else for their problems or shortcomings. Well, let's face it, there are some people like that. And James seems to be one of those people. Despite having to borrow money from Leonard or his mother, James spent most of his time at the bar. His family wasn't judging him for not having his life together, but they were sick of providing for his every need when he wouldn't even try to improve his situation. Instead of using the money he borrowed to make repairs to his car, purchase something more reliable, buy tools for a trade. or even better work clothes, anything to show that he was putting in the effort. He spent most of it on alcohol and lost whatever was left when the stock market crashed in 1973.
Early on Saturday, the day before the murders, which was his 41st birthday, James was seen doing some target practice using his .22 caliber rifle and his .22 caliber handgun. He was shooting tin cans on the edge of the Great Miami River. This was likely after his breakfast with Leonard that day. He had asked his brother to borrow $1,000, on top of everything else he had already owed him, and Leonard refused to loan him the money. Later that night, James vented to the bartender at the 19th Hole Cocktail Lounge about what he called his problem. About 2 weeks earlier, Charity had given him an ultimatum: stop drinking and get a job, or find another place to live for free. According to KIRO7.com, she told him that if he could drink 7 days a week, he could help pay the rent. This wasn't the first time Charity had become frustrated with James and told him he needed to get his act together or get out of her house, but she had never actually kicked him out.
James left the bar around 11 p.m., but ended up going back and staying until 2:30 when the bar closed. After he returned, he spoke with the bartender a bit more and said that he hadn't taken care of his problem yet. He likely knew that his family would be visiting on Easter. Maybe while he was drinking, he was thinking about whether or not he would kill them all. Maybe he was only thinking about when he would do it. Or perhaps he wasn't thinking about his family at all. We just know that at some point before Easter evening, he chose what he saw as a solution to his problems.
At 6 p.m. on the dot, when the bells from a nearby church were ringing, James made his move. He killed his brother Leonard first. He shot him 7 times with shots to the head and chest. Next, he took aim at Alma, his sister-in-law. She was shot once in the heart. The kids in the living room would have all heard the shots ring out and would likely have been frightened. James's mother, Charity, actually ran towards him, trying to stop him. He shot her in the chest and the head before moving on to the children. 11-year-old David, 9-year-old Teresa, and 13-year-old Carol were all shot in the kitchen. As he entered the living room, his oldest nephew, 17-year-old Leonard III, tried to stop him, but James shot him too, 7 times. The rest of the children were still in the living room. He shot them one by one: 12-year-old Anne, 16-year-old Michael, 15-year-old Thomas, and finally 4-year-old John. In all, James fired between 35 and 44 times. Reports soon after the murders as to the total number of shots fired varied wildly. In a matter of a couple moments, James had murdered 11 of his family members in cold blood.
So, Morf, as we finally get to the details of the massacre, I mean, obviously, this is tough to go through. But I also think you have to analyze what this guy did. Right? We talked about James telling others that he had a problem he had to take care of. I think that problem being that his mom was going to kick him out of the house. And his solution to that problem is to kill everyone. And to me, the fact that he waited until so many family members were gathered in one place, on Easter, is telling. This isn't a man who, just wanted to kill his mother because she was going to kick him out of the house. He wanted to kill everyone who he thought he had a problem with. His mother, his brother. He was mad at his sister-in-law. But then there's so many children. And what's the reason for killing all of them? Because they were the offspring of, these 2 people that he was upset with. He envied his brother. He was mad that Alma had chosen his brother. I mean, it's hard to get into the mind of someone who was capable of doing all of this.
Yeah, and this isn't a case where he snapped in the heat of the moment and killed one person. He had to take aim on his family members over and over and over again, firing and firing, going from one to the next, and never along the way, voice of reason coming over him saying, I have to stop this, I shouldn't be doing this. That just never happened. He just kept going and going until everyone was dead. And it must have been horrifying, especially for the kids, seeing the adults all dead and knowing they were next and not being able to do anything about it.
Yeah, horrifying to see, your grandmother, your parents be shot or hear the shots. But then also, think about the fact that a lot of these kids witnessed their brother or sister being killed just before they were killed. I mean, it's a really tough scene. There's no doubt about it. But I want to go back to the point that you made, because I think it's a very interesting one. This wasn't a situation where James got into an argument and snapped. There was a lot of premeditation here. He had been thinking about what he called his problem and how he was going to take care of that. We know that from conversations he had with, people at the bar. And your point that he had so many chances to stop, and he just never did. He kept going all the way down to when he shot and killed 4-year-old John. I mean, Morf, what could a 4-year-old have done to this man in his 4 years on Earth? Nothing.
And it almost makes it seem like he, maybe he did it because he didn't want the children to live without their parents. But as you said, maybe he did it because he viewed them as the offspring of his parents and of their parents, and they didn't deserve to live. So he wanted to eliminate all of them.
Yeah, I kind of lean towards the latter there, in that he just had so much animosity and hatred towards his brother, his sister-in-law, that, annihilating not only them, but their entire family, along with his mom, was somehow in his mind what, he needed to do. It's hard to make sense of. After the murders and not sure what to do, James waited. He sat on the couch, surrounded by his dead family members, for 3 hours. He apparently wrestled with the thought of taking his own life. What stopped him was his belief that suicide is a mortal sin, which is a very serious sin that you must repent for before death, or you'll be damned to hell for eternity. Murder is also a mortal sin, but after committing the massacre, he was still alive to ask God for forgiveness. If he tried to take his own life and succeeded, there would be no time for repentance. As the act of suicide, the mortal sin, would be immediately followed by his death. At around 9:30, with no other real options, he called the police to report his crime.
Officers responding to the home immediately saw 2 bodies in the living room while speaking with James at the front door. One of the guns was resting on the arm of the couch. The rest were on the coffee table. James was arrested and taken into custody without incident. He refused to cooperate with the investigation and wouldn't answer any questions asked of him. He planned to plead not guilty by reason of mental illness. Just before 1 a.m., neighbors were gathered on the lawn next door to watch as authorities began to remove the bodies from the home. It took nearly an hour to take all 11 victims out of the crime scene. According to Fox19.com, one neighbor relayed that as they removed 4-year-old John's body from the home, everybody gasped because they could see his little sneakers.
And I can only imagine what that was like for neighbors. We went through the crime scene, but to see body after body be removed from a home, neighbors are going to be standing, out in their front lawn wondering what's going on. And then to see that, it's going to be very shocking.
Yeah, this kind of thing just doesn't happen in most neighborhoods often, or if at all. So this was something that probably shocked these neighbors.
In the aftermath of the shooting, 2 things seemed odd to police. First, not a single neighbor reported hearing any gunshots. Second, not a single family member was able to escape the home without being killed. It's unknown whether James had purchased or used any silencers, but he did ask about them in February when he was buying ammunition. It's possible he felt a silencer would be unnecessary because of his plan to use the cover of the church bells. As far as none of the family members making it out of the home alive, one early theory was that James had been waiting inside the home, killing each family member one by one. As they entered the home, they came to believe that it all happened so suddenly that the 3 adult family members were killed first, and the young family members were probably in fear. 4-year-old John still had his hands over his ears when authorities walked through the crime scene. He had been startled by so many loud noises. Butler County prosecutor Michael Moser would tell the Journal News in 2022 that the children were literally climbing the walls, adding that their fingernails were broken off in the walls. 47 years after the murders, what he saw that day was still vivid in Moser's memory. He said, "I can still see it as clearly as I can see my wife's picture here in my office."
Denise Hardy, who was an intern with the Hamilton Police Department in 1975, told the Journal News that she remembered that the next morning, behind bars, James was very perky and smiling and upbeat, unconcerned. Denise Hardy was never sure whether it was just a lack of remorse or if there was something else going on. She tried to explain his demeanor by saying maybe he knew and didn't care, but he carried himself as if he did not have any idea what was going on around him, or that he was headed toward an entire life in prison. Because he wasn't smirking or cocky or anything like that, like he planned something and got away with it. He was not appreciating what he had done.
Let's just break that down for a minute. Very perky and smiling and upbeat, unconcerned. Now, is that because he didn't appreciate what he had done? Or was that because he had done exactly what he had been planning to do? And he had solved what he had called his problem, as though all of these concerns that he had that had been building were now just wiped away with the killing of his entire family and extended family.
It seems pretty clear from what she was saying that there was no remorse on his part, and it wasn't a case of him coming to his senses and saying, "Oh my God, what have I done?" There was none of that. He was just sort of matter of fact and not really engaged in what had happened.
Yeah, if anything, I was taking her statements to mean that, he was happy that it was maybe all behind him, which is a hard thing to think about. News of the murders was shocking and made national headlines. The family had one funeral with all 11 caskets lined up in a row at Sacred Heart Catholic Church. They were all buried in Arlington Memorial Gardens in Cincinnati, Ohio. The community had lost an entire family. Hamilton Police Chief George McNally told the New York Times, "This kind of murder usually has a motive, like sex, greed, or jealousy. We can't find any of those things here. Some aspects of this case just leave us puzzled." Despite it being clear that James was the one to kill his mother, Charity, and brother, Leonard, James was still eligible to inherit both of their estates, since there was no other next of kin. But the key was he would only inherit anything if he was found not guilty, which everyone agreed was quite unlikely. But it was a substantial inheritance to be hopeful for. He stood to receive about $300,000, which would today be close to $2 million. Well, first of all, that is a boatload of money. But I really want to kind of dissect the police chief's quote to the New York Times, that they really couldn't find a motive. Now, we've talked about a lot of things that would be considered motives for James to have done, what he did. Maybe at the point that he was talking to the New York Times, they didn't know about all that stuff yet. That's the only thing I can think of. Because, when you talk about greed, well, there was a lot of money, and there's no doubt that he was jealous of his brother.
I think in this case, it's hard to pick just one motive because there's so much we laid out so far, and now you've got this money on top of it. But the odd thing is, if the money's part of it, he didn't think too clearly about how he'd be spending it from behind bars.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think James was thinking too clearly about a lot of things.
Prosecutors argue that financial gain was part of the motive. Not only did James not want to pay his brother back for all the loans and stay in his mother's home without having to pay rent or find employment, he wanted everything they had left to give him. According to the New York Daily News, prosecutor John Holcomb called James a disgraceful little coward. Rather than face a jury, he opted to be tried by a panel of 3 judges. In July 1975, 2 out of the 3 judges found James guilty of all of the murders. He was given 11 consecutive sentences of life in prison. He was surprised when the verdict wasn't unanimous, because the whole reason he chose to go with a panel of judges instead of facing a jury was because he had been told that all 3 judges would have to agree with each other. Suddenly, only 2 judges were deciding his fate. After appealing due to this supposed judicial error, James was granted a second trial.
Well, and I have to ask the question, what was going on with this third judge? I mean, it couldn't have been that James didn't commit the acts. I think that was clear. That wasn't in dispute. And we don't have all the facts, but maybe it had something to do with his mental state.
He never denied doing it. His whole defense was that he wasn't mentally well when it happened.
A motion to dismiss the case on the grounds of double jeopardy was rejected. It might have been a different decision. If the original verdict had been not guilty, then it just would look like the state was desperately trying to throw an innocent person in prison, despite the fact that they had already been told he wasn't guilty. James was able to get the trial moved 125 miles away to Findlay in Hancock County. It was there that he would risk a trial by jury, thinking he'd have a more impartial juror pool. It would be years between the original verdict and his new trial due to delays in various motions.
A year after the murders, the Ruppert home was still exactly as it had been left. There was still a pan of meat on the stove for Sloppy Joes. Everything still usable was sold at an auction before the house was thoroughly cleaned. The carpet was also replaced. The first family to move in after this, reportedly unaware of what happened there, moved out after claiming to hear strange voices.
And I think this comes up in a lot of true crime cases. When you have a murder that occurs inside a home, and then later that home is sold, that's always a topic of conversation. Well, here you have a whole family, 11 people killed inside one house, some of them small children, and this fact wasn't disclosed to buyers. That is shocking to me.
And that's the biggest investment you're ever going to make is a home. So to not have full disclosure of what happened there just seems like a huge overstep. And maybe the laws back then aren't the same as they are now, but a lot of places now, it's required to have this information up front for a family to decide whether it is something they can deal with or not. Me personally, I don't know how you feel, but I wouldn't want to live in a house like that. And especially as these people that bought it started claiming they heard voices in the house. That would definitely be a hard no for me.
Yeah, I'm right with you. And I do think the laws have changed over time about, what disclosures have to be made. I mean, this almost sounds like it was an Amityville horror type situation. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of people, or let me say some people, who may think, well, I can get such a great deal on this home because of the stigma that surrounds it, that they're willing to roll the dice. But I'm with you, Morf. I mean, that's just not something I would be willing to take on. I kind of view my home as the safe place, right? The place where I can relax. I think I would have a very hard time relaxing inside of a home where I knew 11 people were killed.
And not everybody believes in ghosts, and not everybody that would move in there would believe in ghosts, but they might still be bothered by the energy, just of what happened there. That some people believe homes can hold on to energy and negative energy at that. So Either way, I think it makes sense that the family should have been told what kind of house they were moving into.
Sadly, at 4:30 in the morning on Easter Sunday, 1978, Alma Ruppert's father, Frank Algier, took his own life. He was 72 when he shot himself in the head. Alma's mother, Edna, considers Frank another victim of James Ruppert. 4:30 a.m. is the exact time they learned that their daughter, son-in-law, and 8 grandchildren had been killed, and Frank was the one who had picked up the phone that morning. It had weighed on him every day since. Like so many tragedies, one small thing changed the course of the lives of the Ruppert family. Before they were killed, Leonard and Alma made sure that both sets of their parents were able to see the children as much as possible. They had a system worked out to efficiently split the time. On most holidays, the family would attend Mass with Charity, have lunch, and then go see Edna and Frank. Easter 1975 was the first time they reversed their schedule, having lunch with Alma's parents and then heading to Charity's house for dinner. If they hadn't changed the way they usually did things, would they have left before James woke up at 4 in the afternoon, or by the time he would have started shooting? Would the Easter Sunday massacre have been avoided because James was still upstairs, sleeping off his drinks from earlier that morning and the night before? So there's two things that kind of strike me here more. And the first is, what happened to Frank. I think we've talked about it before, but it's kind of like this spider web of people who are affected. Now, he was very close to the family, right? He was Alma's father, but that web kind of spans out, and these things affect so many people. But obviously it affected him greatly, and he couldn't live with it. And then the second is, this idea that one little thing, one change in the day, a different decision could potentially have resulted in a different outcome. And I think, it's hard to do when you start playing that kind of what if game, but obviously there are things that occur in all of our lives, decisions that we make that could change the course of our lives. Now, we don't know that at the time.
Edna even recalled Alma telling her that she didn't want to go to see Charity that day because she knew James would be there, and things were awkward because Leonard had just turned him down for a loan and the eviction threat was looming. And sadly, Edna told Alma that they had to go because Charity deserved to see her grandchildren and Leonard deserved to see his mother. Edna told the Cincinnati Post, "To my dying day, I will regret saying that." So I think it's clear that she had a little bit of guilt, even though it wasn't her fault what happened, that had she not maybe forced them or urged them to go, that they might still be alive.
Yeah, and this idea of regret, it pops up in so many different true crime cases. And obviously there's no way that Edna could have known what was going to happen, but you also can't stop that regret. And I assume no matter how much you tell yourself that, well, this really isn't my fault, it's going to weigh on you because you did say the words, but there's no way you could have known what was going to happen that day.
And it's sad to think about her having, after all this, losing her daughter, her grandchildren, and her husband, to have that guilt weighing on her all that time. It's really sad.
Yeah, it is. But it's just, again, what goes along with these types of crimes. You have the victims who are killed, and that is, beyond sad. But you also have a lot of other victims who didn't die, weren't even involved in the actual shooting, but have to live with what happened. And like in the case of Edna, have to live with the fact that she told her daughter that they should go visit Leonard's mother, even though there's nothing wrong with saying that.
Yeah, she might have had that same guilt or a similar kind of guilt if she asked her daughter to run an errand and she was killed in a car accident running that errand. But it was, in this case, it just happened to be, the murders of her family.
Trading shouldn't have barriers. When Robinhood started, it was built to make trading more accessible. Now Robinhood offers more sophisticated trading tools. Experience the future of trading on Robinhood Legend, the all-new desktop platform that harnesses intuitive design to deliver a seamless experience for traders. Free to use with a Robinhood account, Robinhood Legend is designed for how you trade, with powerful charts including custom intervals down to the tick, and over 80 indicators and drawing tools. Trade all your favorite assets, including popular stocks and ETFs, all in one place. Take your trading to the next level by customizing your layout in seconds, and even enter and exit positions in one tap, right from the chart, with up to 8 charts per layout. The future of trading is fast, powerful, and precise. Experience it now on Robinhood Legend. Sign up today. Investing is risky. Robinhood Financial LLC. Member SIPC is a registered broker-dealer. Other fees may apply.
The second trial for James Ruppert finally began in 1982, 7 years after the murders. His attorney, Hugh Holbrook, was so convinced that James was insane at the time of the murders that he actually funded the defense, hiring experts and doctors with money out of his own pocket. At this trial, 2 psychiatrists testified about James's mental state. They explained that James was paranoid and had been suffering from delusions of persecution. The jury was not swayed, and James was again found guilty, but he was only found guilty of the murders of Charity and Leonard Jr. He was found not guilty by reason of mental illness of the other 9 murders. During that trial, a juror had a heart attack and passed away. Alma Ruppert's mother, Edna, blamed James for the juror's death, telling the Cincinnati Enquirer those pictures must have got to him.
According to the New York Times, James's attorney, Hugh Holbrook, has argued that the words, "thou shalt not kill," is as applicable to the state as it is to any individual. There are 11 dead, the most horrible thing that has happened in the United States of America in a long time, he told the judges, adding, "do not make this a worse crime by adding a 12th person." It's unclear why Holbrook was so concerned about the death penalty, because the massacre occurred during a period of time in the United States that had no option for the death penalty. The moratorium lasted 4 years, from 1972 to 1976. Even if it had been a unanimous decision by all 3 judges or all 12 jurors, James would have been ineligible for the death penalty because the crime occurred in 1975 when capital punishment was not administered. After being found guilty again, though of only 2 of the murders this time, James was given 2 consecutive sentences of life in prison.
To many people, the verdict here is surprising. In essence, the jury believed that James was guilty when he committed the first 2 murders and was sane. But by the 3rd murder, just seconds later, and the remaining murders, James was insane. There were clearly elements here of premeditation. Some people think that James knew full well what he was doing each time he pulled the trigger, and that he was always in control. Many people feel that James got off without having to be responsible for 9 of the 11 murders. Either way, he would never be a free man again. James Ruppert was denied parole in 1995 when he was 61, and again in 2005 when he was 71. Each time he became eligible, there was an outpouring of outraged opinions from the public. And Morf, I too thought that this verdict was surprising. And he was not mentally ill when he killed Leonard and Charity, but then was mentally ill when he committed the 9 murders after that. I just thought it was very strange. You would think it would be an all or nothing proposition.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever heard a case like this where somebody is, in a space of minutes, committing these crimes all over a space of minutes, has a change in their mental state during the murders and not, before or after. If if these had been spaced out for months or something like that, maybe you could say, okay, he got his mental illness grew and then he did this again. But we're talking over, minutes here. So it's kind of strange.
And I don't know, maybe if that was, some compromise by the jury, that people were struggling to come to a unanimous decision, and that was a compromise that they made in the jury room. I don't know. I can't explain it.
Edna Algier passed away in 2004 at the age of 92. Even after losing 8 grandchildren, she was survived by 16 grandchildren and had another 13 great-grandchildren. 10 years later, in 2014, bloodstains from the massacre were still visible on the wood underneath the floorboards in the home. It had pooled so thick after the murders that it dripped down into the basement. The floors have been cleaned, carpets have been replaced, but the blood remains on the side of the boards making up the first story subflooring. Apparently, it was just left there.
And that makes it, even more eerie, I think, for people who moved in afterwards.
That's one thing we don't really talk about, is what happens to a crime scene after the police leave and they take the tape away. They don't come back with a set of janitors and say, okay, let us get this cleaned up. That's on the homeowners or whoever is responsible for the home. We mentioned earlier that even a year later, food that they had been ready to eat on Easter was still on the counter. So just whoever took that house over didn't make any efforts to really clean it thoroughly, it seems.
The family that moved into the former Ruppert home in 2008 had no idea about the massacre when they were closing on the house. According to WCPO.com, real estate agents in the state have no responsibility to disclose what is classified as a psychological stigma. Cinnamon Baker, the new owner, explained to WCPO.com that it didn't bother her. All houses had a past. But as Baker explained, this one just happened to have a history everyone knew. Cinnamon Baker said, if I stop and think about it, sure, it's creepy and scary, but it doesn't make me feel any less safe being here. Today, the home is blurred on Google Maps, and over the years, many people stopped outside to gawk at the house of horrors.
Dennis Snyder, who owned the home before he sold it to Cinnamon Baker, was irritated by the stigma. Before Cinnamon bought it, he was having a very difficult time selling it because neighbors were very vocal about what had happened inside. It kept turning buyers away. Dennis Snyder told WCPO.com that in his mind, it's just a building that something happened in. To me, it doesn't matter. I don't believe in the occult and all that hogwash.
Could there be some kind of dark energy haunting the neighborhood? In June 1996, a year after James Ruppert had been denied parole for the first time, another murder shocked Minor Avenue, and it happened in the duplex diagonally across the street from the Ruppert home, where Tina Mott lived with her boyfriend, Timothy Bradford, and their young child. After slitting the throat of his girlfriend, Bradford used multiple weapons, including 19 different knives, a meat cleaver, pliers, and a hacksaw to dismember her body in the upstairs bathroom. Some of her remains were flushed down the toilet, while others were collected in garbage bags. Bradford left the trash bags in a field near the sewage treatment plant and threw her skull, without a jaw or any teeth, into a lake. Bradford received a 25-year sentence for voluntary manslaughter, and in December of 2023, he was released from prison without supervision. Since he completed his full 25-year sentence, there were no measures like parole that could be taken. Tina Mott was reportedly well aware of the Easter Sunday massacre that had taken place just steps from her own front door, only 2 decades earlier. It wasn't enough to scare her off. If it had been, maybe she'd still be alive.
Yeah, it's surprising that this guy that murdered his girlfriend right across the street only got 25 years for what he did, because the brutality and the depravity of it, it just seems so heinous that to get 25 years for it is Seems like a very light sentence.
Well, and I was shocked that it was voluntary manslaughter and not murder, given, what we said happened. But we don't have all the details of the case, but it was very gruesome, obviously.
In 2015, James Ruppert was denied parole for a third time. According to the Journal News, the parole board noted that the 81-year-old James had not completed any recommended programming, and at the time, he did not appear to be willing to do so. They also revealed that his record noted negative institutional conduct. James Ruppert died at the age of 88 at the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections, Franklin Medical Center, in Columbus, Ohio in June 2022. It was apparently from natural causes, as he had been moved from the Allen Oakwood Correctional Institution in Lima to Franklin Medical Center in 2019 due to the poor state of his health. He outlived his victims by 47 years. Butler County Sheriff Specialist Mike Grimes, who was a detective on the case in 1975, told the Journal News, "It's a relief for taxpayers. They don't have to pay for him anymore." His next parole hearing was set for April of this year, 2025. He would have been 91. The annihilation of the Ruppert family is still the deadliest mass shooting in the state of Ohio. And even today, it still doesn't make sense how someone could do something so terrible to 11 members of their family on an Easter Sunday.
That's an interesting take by that guy, Mike Grimes. It's a relief for taxpayers. They don't have to pay for him anymore. And I'm not sure, Morf, that a lot of people wouldn't share that same sentiment. To me, anyone who could do what James Ruppert did is not someone that I would want out, walking the streets. And so I think when he does finally die, I don't know that many people would have shed a tear for him.
Yeah, he probably didn't have too many supporters, and he had no family left, as far as we know, unless they were distant. So, he lived a lonely life behind bars. He had time to think about what he did all those years ago. But according to his last parole hearing when he was denied, it didn't sound like he had done what was expected of him to show remorse, to try and show that he had changed since committing those murders.
Well, I just wonder, if he made the decision. I'm in my 70s, I'm in my 80s. I'm not going through any of this programming, as they called it. They're never going to let me out anyway. I'm sure a lot of prisoners, probably have that same type of thought.
And he may have thought that at his age, he was better off staying right where he was. And what did he have to go out to if he was released? He had no family, no support system, no money, no anything. So maybe he just figured after all that time, he'd be better in prison.
But as we wrap this one up, the fact that this is still the deadliest mass shooting in the state of Ohio, and it occurred, 50 years ago? I mean, that tells you something. This was an unbelievable tragedy on a pretty epic scale. And then I think the fact that it occurred on Easter Sunday, I'm sure that was just one of the reasons why this made, the headlines. It garnered national attention, the number of people killed plus the timing.
Yeah, it is a bit surprising that this was the largest mass shooting still in Ohio, because there's been some high profile ones. I remember how many people were killed in the Roden family, Pike County shootings. I think a family of 8, if I'm not mistaken. So for this to still outrank some of those other high profile cases, it just tells you how heinous this was and how rare it is.
But I go back to, the reasons behind it. And James is about to be evicted, right? His mom has had enough of him living rent-free, drinking every night, not getting a job. So you have that, and then you have what seemed to be envy on the part of James towards his brother, and maybe even Alma as well. And then this kind of Side note that James maybe once dated Alma. There was a lot that went into this thing. But the bottom line is that James didn't seem like a guy who really wanted to get his life together. He was happy to kind of drink late into the night, sleep late in the day. All these people around him, especially his brother, they were flourishing. They had a great life. They had a great family. And I think he was very jealous of that. He felt as though that should have been his life. And maybe even that Alma should have been his wife. And they should have shared that life together.
Yeah, this case is very reminiscent to me of a lot of cases in which somebody kills their family. A lot of times it's a younger person that's maybe in college and failing out of college, and their parents are giving them ultimatums, or they don't want their parents to know. And instead of trying to better their situation, they decide the best outcome is to kill their family. It's like a common thread in a lot of the cases we discussed of family murders, it seems.
But in every one, right, it's hard to kind of understand the mindset that you have what you perceive as this problem, or maybe it is a real problem. I think oftentimes one that you created and one that you're perpetuating, but your solution to the problem is not to get your butt in gear and better yourself. It's to kill family, either because they're harping on you or you're hoping to get their money so that you can continue to live your life the way you want to. It's just impossible to understand. But that's it for our episode on the Easter Massacre and James Ruppert. If you love the show but haven't done so yet, take a minute, go out, give us a rating, leave a review. Also, keep telling your friends. Word of mouth about the Criminology podcast really helps us out.
If you want to find us on social media, we're on X with the handle @CriminologyPod. You can also find us on Facebook by going to facebook.com/CriminologyPodcast. And you can join our Facebook discussion group, Criminology Podcast Discussion and Fans.
So that's it for another episode of Criminology, but Morf and I will be back with all of you next Saturday night with a brand new episode. So until then, for Mike
and Morf,
we'll talk to you next week.
Take care, everyone.